Metroid Samus Returns has now been released, and with Metroid Prime 4 being in development for the Switch, I thought it would be cool to go back and look at some of the older Metroids and look at how they once were, now that the Metroid franchise seemed to have been brought back from the dead pretty much. Metroid Fusion is the one we'll be focusing on this time. It's the first Metroid I played, and therefore it sets the standard for what the Metroid games are for me, which is why I was a bit surprised when I played the other ones and found out they were pretty much kind of like open world styled games, since Metroid Fusion definitely is more linear than most of its sisters. Metroid Fusion was released in 2002 for the Game Boy Advance, the same year that Metroid Prime for the GameCube was released. The 2D handheld Metroid turned out to be pretty great, and one of, if not the most, tense and eerie Metroid games out of them all, due to the soulless clone of Samus, the SAX, hunting you down throughout the whole game. The game turned out, like I said, to be pretty good, but it changed a whole lot from when it was first seen or first showed off to the final product. The game was supposed to be released for the Game Boy Color, but instead the project was eventually moved to the Game Boy Advance. Usually, betas of games look fairly similar to their final version in terms of graphics and art style, but Metroid Fusion is different. For Metroid Fusion, the early beta looked entirely different. Samus looked nothing like she does normally, and seemed to look bigger, stronger, more sluggish, with more weapons and different colors and a different design as a whole. Looking at this picture right here, she seems to have some kind of blade weapon on her right arm that possibly could have been used in-game as well. She looked kind of like a robot. Even the way she walked looked robotic and very similar to how the Chosen statues walk. Because she's not wearing her blue fusion suit, it could also mean that in this game, or in this version of the game rather, there was an entirely different story at this point, or maybe a story just wasn't created yet. After all, this game was just titled Metroid 4 at this point, and not Fusion. We also see the camera zooming in and showing a 3D rendered cutscene, but it was probably just edited for this showcase of the game at E3. It is clear that the area designs were not finished, at least several of them, as the background looks very plain and undetailed. We can, however, see windows out to space, so she probably was at the space station in the beta as well, just like the final game. Samus had some abilities here that didn't carry over to the full release of the game. As seen in this clip, it seems like she's using the grapple beam, which is from Super Metroid, something that didn't appear in the final cut of Metroid Fusion. Here we also see some kind of gravity changing ability, allowing her to walk on ceilings and on the walls. We also see a map over Sector 1. If you didn't know, in Metroid Fusion it is split up into 6 different sectors, all with a different theme. But here, the map of Sector 1 looks entirely different from the one we got on release. Not only is the level design different, but the map itself has a detailed overview of the area, whilst the final game has a grid map. A year later, on E3 2002, Metroid Fusion was shown off again, but this time the game had gotten a complete makeover and looked a lot more similar to the final game. Still, there were several things that were different. The heads-up display looked different and had a green bar on top left corner. Not sure what that was all about. It also had a radar of some kind in the top right corner, but is still unknown what really did. At least I couldn't find anything about it. The X-Parasites, being the main enemy and also the source of health in this game, had a solid purple color here instead of the normal yellow ones that turned out to be the final version of the X-Parasites. Some of the enemies had different color palettes as well in this beta. The font that was used looked very different, and we can also see some unused beta rooms. Here we also see some generators from Sector 1, and in the beta they are greenish and white, spinning around, compared to how they turn out in the full game. You can also tell that most areas we see are slightly different in some way or another from how they turn out to be in the final release, having slightly different backgrounds, different colors, or an enemy that shouldn't normally be there. But other than this, the beta looked very similar to the full release in every way. It was a lot more recognizable than the first beta we saw, and it had also received the Metroid Fusion title, even though the title screen looked very different from its final release. But it's crazy to think about just how much this game changed from 2001 to its release about a year later. In 2001 it looked like a different game entirely, with different mechanics, different weapons, a different design for Samus, different art style and a different name. But it would be interesting to see a game with this hybrid like Samus with blades on her hand. Maybe we'll see that someday, maybe in Metroid Prime 4. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyways, thank you for watching. Subscribe, and you'll be notified whenever I upload a video. Thanks for watching.